Welcome to the Amazing Truth Podcast, a podcast where we focus on real issues and have real talk, and as always, provide a biblical perspective. We hope that you will be blessed as you listen.
Hello and welcome to the Amazing Truth Podcast. This is the Amazing Truth Minute.
This is the Amazing Truth Podcast. The Amazing Truth Podcast. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook at the Amazing Truth Podcast. The Amazing Truth Podcast. Real issues, real talk.
For the Amazing Truth Minute today, we'll focus on 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verses 18. And it says, I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. No matter our age, human beings never outgrow the need to be parented. Some of us come from homes with excellent parents, while others grow up with, absentee or abusive parents. Regardless of that, God longs to father us. Even the best intentioned parents make mistakes while raising children, because as humans, we are all flawed. But God is the perfect parent. He is both provisional and practical. As a loving father, he meets our needs and is faithful to guide, protect, and discipline his children. The New Testament teaches that we are adopted as sons and daughters through Jesus Christ. That's Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5. Adoption is an intentional act that requires forethought from the adoptive parent. The scriptures make it clear that God embraces the role of a father and that he chose us before the foundation of the world to be his children. Every child of God has the opportunity to be parented by a loving father who wants the best for his children. And that is the Amazing Truth Minute.
This is the Amazing Truth Podcast. The Amazing Truth Podcast. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook at the Amazing Truth Podcast. The Amazing Truth Podcast. Real issues, real talk.
All right. Welcome back. That was a good devotion, Truth Minute to Kenan.
I know.
I liked it. I'll say God is a good father and mother.
Yes.
Gives us both the motherly and the fatherly, And I say that because this segment, we men are going to just learn from the experts. Yes. We are back with Nancy. Man, I wish you guys, if you haven't listened to the previous podcast, what would you tell them, Kenan, to do?
Please go and watch, go and listen. If this section,
it's very easy for you to say go, but why?
Why?
Because
Because
summarized last week.
Last week we met Nancy. We learned how she immigrated to this country at 14 years of age. She experiences loneliness, lack of acceptance, school, the diversity piece and all that. Then she goes to college, navigates medicine and finds her niche, finds out what she's good at. And I think we stopped. She was just about to. She has a beautiful son that gives her strength. And why am I telling them all this?
She became a teen mom. Hey, we're not gonna tell you the whole story because we're here for the new podcast.
Yeah,
so please kindly take time, go listen to the amazing, inspiring, powerful journey of Nancy, and I can promise you will get something that you can work with. At the very least, you will laugh at the jokes of Kenan. So you won't be losing anything when we go through all that. But we're back with Nancy. And Nancy, good to see you again. It's exciting. Of course, it's always breathtaking just to hear your journey, to see your story. So, last week we left where you told us you went to do masters. But take us slow. A little bit. Just take us a little bit.
Yeah.
So when do you, because in the introduction last week you said you have 4 kids. Timeline wise, where are the rest? How do the rest appear in this picture? How do we get there?
Are you still in college?
Are you in college? Are you in graduate school?
Yeah.
When? And how?
Yeah. Well, it all happens all throughout that period. But I graduated my bachelor's, and in between my bachelor's and my master's, I met my husband. yeah, I honestly feel like God sent my husband at the right time. Sent me the right
Hey, let's give
person at the
flowers.
right
That's
time.
powerful. Kenan, I wish our wives say that.
They do.
They do, right? I wish out at our wives too,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know. But anyways, that's a beautiful thing to say,
Amen.
especially in this age.
Yeah. No, he's an amazing person. He's a man of God. His heart just, I say there are people, for me, faith takes work. It takes effort. It takes just that conscious effort for me to continually grow in my faith. My husband just naturally gravitates towards good. And I think God knew that that's what I needed in my life. And at this point, being a single mother, in an African single mother, Kenyan single mother, I think at that point, Kisi single mother, I think at that point I'd kind of decided for myself that maybe the marriage path wasn't for me. I was pretty set on just raising my son. And then again, God does things in his own time, in his own way. I don't know if we want to touch on the story of how I met my husband.
I was gonna ask that. I mean,
why wouldn't you?
why? Of course, of all. Why? You know,
We all have a good love story.
It has, it's funny. It has something to do with Pastor Mokwa. I don't know
Oh,
if he
really?
even knows that.
Shout out Pastor Eric.
Let me stop you. I think
I know where you're about to go
mine
with
as
that.
well has something to do with Pastor Mokwa, so I can relate. But go ahead.
That's amazing. But yeah,
Okay.
I was in this phase where I just, again, you hear as a single mother, you hear a lot of, there's just things that people say that turn you off from even the idea of marriage or desire to be married. And so I was in this place where I was honestly content. I think I shared my heart with God. I said, if that's something that God wanted for me, I'd be open for it. But truthfully, maybe I wasn't. I was just saying that. But I did say that prayer. And we had a camp meeting at MOB church. And Pastor Mokwar he's another person that was a really good support system for me during this time, and his wife. And so I'd found community in our church, in our small church. And we had a guest speaker coming in. I do not recall the name of this pastor. I wish I did, but he was from Australia. I remember that much. He was Kenyan, visiting pastor. And I attended the camp meeting, was there all day with my son. And I remember in the evening as we were cleaning up, he pulled me aside and he asked me, I was like, well, I've seen you a few times and I've seen you with a little boy. I'm assuming that that's your son. And I told him, yeah, that is my son. And he was just like, you look fairly young to have a son. He was, I think, about 4 or 5 at this point. And he asked me if I was married. I told him no, I wasn't married. He asked me about my son's dad, and I told him that we were co-parenting, but we were not married. And he continued to pry, which was uncomfortable, but I was like, oh, he's a man of God. I continued going. And I remember him asking me, he said, what is your plan for the rest of your life? And I said, well, in college, I'm about to go for my master's. And at this point, I actually had not fully decided against medicine, but I was considering doing physician assistant school because that was much shorter. So I told him I'm considering going into physician assistant school, and but beyond that, I'm planning on just raising my son, and that's what I'm doing. And he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry to say this, but he said, you're very young. You have a lot of life ahead of you. And I don't think shutting that door to marriage is something that God wants for you. He said, I feel strongly that I should let you know this. That's something that I feel God wants me to say to you. And he said, I feel like if you go down this path, you might essentially end up being in a position where you realize later on that marriage is something you desire. But at that point, you might end up being in a position where the potential people that you could be married to someone's husband. And then it might lead you down this path where you're a homebreaker. And I was like, what are you talking about? How did this go
He
from...
went deep, man.
Homebreaker. And he was like, I have to draw the picture for you because I feel like this is something that God really wants for you. And I think it's something you desire, but I think you're letting your circumstances take that away from you. And it's something that really resonated with me, and it touched me deeply. Because I think I desired marriage. I desired to have more children. I desired a family. I had this sense, even as a little kid, that I wanted my ministry to be my family. I felt like that's what God was calling me to, but I just could not understand why he had me on this journey that I was on as a single mother and where that would fit in. And being a part of the community that we were in, how that with the stigma, how that was going to even, I didn't have that picture. And so he sat me down, he asked me if he wanted to pray for me, if I'd let him pray for me, and he prayed for me. And I left. I left that camp meeting. My sister was visiting from Kenya, and she was about to leave. We decided, some of our friends and I, would go just take her out to dinner. And we ended up, after dinner, we stopped at salsa dance club. I don't salsa dance. Nobody dances. I don't know how we ended up at a salsa dancing club, but we ended up there with my sister. And I remember standing there because, again, I can't salsa dance. So we were watching people salsa dance. And I remember from just the corner of my eye seeing a guy looking at me. And turns out it was my husband. He was being a little creepy. But we end up getting introduced to each other through his friends and the friends that we were with. And in that small place where, there were no other Kenyans, no other Black people, two people that couldn't salsa dance. We happened to be there. He happened to be from the same place that I grew up. So it was very interesting how we met. And mind you, this is like a few hours after the pastor had prayed for me.
My goodness.
Was it?
It was the same night. Wow. And so we ended up talking, exchanging numbers, and he wanted to go out for coffee the next day. But I told him, hey, if you're interested in coffee, we can have it at church because we have a camp meeting at church.
Okay.
Evangelist.
I know, right? Evangelize. Anywhere you are, you can spread the gospel. But yeah, my husband ended up coming and staying through the entire week-long camp meeting. And I ended up actually introducing him to that pastor before he left. And I remember he laughed. He was like, I wasn't thinking the prayers were going to work this quickly. Maybe slow down a little bit. But so that's how we ended up meeting. And it turns out somehow our families know each other. Our parents happen to be really close friends. And so everything just seemed to align with how I met my husband and how he came into my life. But I think it's a testament of God. And I just want to say, I think a lot of people, a lot of women, men, I think sometimes circumstances can get in our way, and we can let those circumstances steal our dreams and potentially even rob us of people that God wants in our lives. And I'm glad that pastor was there that day. I'm glad that he really saw me, really, really saw me. And he wasn't afraid to speak to me and to speak to my heart. Yeah, but that's the long story short.
That's a beautiful story, man. Kenan, we need to be praying for people.
You are a man of God. How many matches have you made?
But it's a beautiful story how everything aligns. It's outside your control. It's not like you went searching, looking, all that. And so, but here's my question though. You have a son.
Yeah.
You guys have this conversation.
Yeah.
How does that go down the line and stuff?
With my husband?
If you don't mind, because you're still a single, and I think for every single
yeah.
mom, you have to account that I have a child, right?
I do.
And the man, will also have to say, am I ready to be a dad to this child and be in this child's life? How was that journey? And then we transition to masters and stuff and everything.
So again, I want to say, I think when God's hand is in something, a lot of things can be effortless. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm not saying that it was easy. But I had to, at that point, I think I'd come to really trust God to guide me in a lot of things. And so I really kept relationships at arm's length. I kept my husband at arm's length. I didn't go into a relationship with him. I wanted to know him as a person before I ever brought him around my son, before I ever introduced my son to him. I wanted my family to know him first and to know his character before any of that. And so we went through this period, months of just talking. Honestly, the first few weeks, all my husband and I did was do devotions over the phone together. He would call me. I'd say, hey, I'm doing my devotion. Do you want to join me? And he'd do that. And so he kept doing these things that, for me, I think I was intentionally trying to push him away. But he kept responding in the way that I wasn't expecting. He would sit there and do devotion with me. He would come to church with me. I'm sure you saw me bring him to church. And I want to say that my husband had never stepped into an Adventist church before that. So he was doing all these things that were not what I was expecting for him to do. And he was very authentic. He was very genuine. And so I kept looking for red flags, which I think every single mother, I think every girl should be watching out for, honestly. I was watching out for red flags, and I just couldn't find any red flags. And so for me, then that became like, maybe it's too good to be true, in a sense. And so for me, I brought him around my family. So our whole dating experience was in front of, he came home and had dinner with my mom. My dad was there. My siblings were there. We all lived in the same house. So he would come have dinner and then go to his house. So the whole time we dated was in front of our family. And so I got to see how he was with my family. I got to see how he was with my son. And as far as my son, I want to say for me, the thing that spoke out to me the most was he didn't come in.
How old was his son? How old is his son?
My son was 5 at this point. He didn't come in trying to parent my son. He was very honest about just not having been around kids. And he took time to get to know him. And again, this is around family. It's not just me and him. And so I think there's aspects of someone's character that you get to see when you have him around other people. There's things other people can see that you might not see. And so that's what we did. And for a whole year, we literally spent every single day, because he would come over and have dinner and then go to his place together. And I got to really see him and really know him. And I did put him up to, I told him if he wanted to date me, he had to take my dad to dinner and ask for his permission. Again, I was trying to push him
Wow.
because again, I had a son to protect.
Yes,
I had another human being that I had to think about. And if this is someone that was going to be in his life, I had to be sure that it was someone that was going to be good for him. And he passed all the tests with flying colors.
Yeah, I'm happy for the brother.
The brother
I think they would have had great flags.
That dinner out.
You know.
Yeah.
But that's a beautiful story, Nancy, man. Thanks for sharing that, because I think, especially in this day and age we live, people don't see authentic dating and relationships and stuff, you know. And I'm not coming at social media and, you know, online dating and stuff, but that traditional past. How long since you met until you're married?
Until married. So we were very intentional about courting. I want to say that. It sounds old fashioned, but that's what we wanted. I was a mother, and I made that clear. If I was going to go down this path with someone, it was something that was either leading to marriage, or there wasn't a relationship of trying things out or seeing how things work out. And so we dated for a year before we got engaged. And again, that whole year was
You
very
find red flags?
courtship.
No,
No red.
fast.
That was the year that we spent time with my parents, with my family every single day. And so looking for the red flags, I didn't find any. But we got engaged. He asked me to marry him our anniversary, our first year anniversary. Just because, again, it was a short time, but we literally spent every single
quality
day
quality
time together, knowing each other, and just being a part of each other's lives, daily lives. And then we got married 9 months after that. Because we had to go through premarital counseling to get ready for marriage, which is another thing. I'm just like, I wish every couple would go through that.
I agree with you.
Before they got
I wish I
married.
took it more serious.
Yeah.
I'm really literally there. I'm learning, and but anyway, I agree with you.
Yeah. So, and then we got married after almost 2 years, close to 2 years from dating to getting married. Yeah.
So 3 more kids.
Yeah. So 3 more kids.
First of all, question now. Going back to the previous episode, how is your mental health at this point?
Yes, in this phase, because that's a big factor.
At this phase, I feel like I was still going through therapy. Because again, I'm still navigating single parenthood. There's a lot of different things. So for me, that piece of just continually spending time checking in with myself, with my mental health, was important. And I think from the moment that I had postpartum, I want to say it is postpartum. I did have postpartum depression with my first son.
How does that look like? How did that look like for someone who's
going through it? It's a lot. It's different
for different people.
For me, it presented as just clinical depression. A lot of having to really force myself to do things, force myself to be interested in doing things. I was it never affected how I cared for my son, but it affected how I cared for myself. I really struggled with finding the motivation to enjoy life in general. Life felt really empty, really dark at times. And it continued. I think it was very intense in those first few months after I had my son, but pieces of it continued. I occasionally would struggle with depressive moods and episodes. And I think it just kind of lingered. It never went away. So during this period, I think my mental health got better as my faith grew and I found my grounding in that piece, in my spiritual journey. And that alongside therapy, I think the two really helped me find my grounding. And so when I went into marriage, I want to say by that point my mental health was good. It was stable. And then we had, I want to preface with this. My husband and I, going into marriage, we discussed that something that was important to us was that we'd have in our family, being available for our children was important. Being able to be present in their upbringing and not necessarily letting other people parent them was something that was important if we were going to have more children. So in those discussions, we discussed the possibility of one of us having more flexibility with their job, with their career, or not necessarily staying home, but making sure that there was one of us that was available. So going into it, we were not planning on homeschooling, but that was always there, our desire to be present for our children's upbringing.
Quick question. What experience kind of pushed you more towards making that decision even before you got kids?
Even before we had kids.
She already had one, but before
I
both of
already
you.
have one. Both of us, I honestly want to say it's our faith. I think we felt strongly that if, God gives us these children, and I think also being our generation, I think we saw, as thankful as we are for our parents, I think we saw our parents do a lot of community child rearing, a lot of other people kind of being a part of our upbringings. And that's something, as good as it is, raising children in a community is important, but we wanted to be more intentional about putting the children before work, before other things, and not the other way around. I think we'd seen a lot of that the other way, where it was work and then children. And so we were very intentional about that going into marriage. At least that's something we discussed beforehand.
Was homeschooling ever an option at this point?
No, at this point, no. God, no. No. No, we always said homeschool children were very awkward and weird. Homeschooling was for weird people, strange people, extremists. But we were not. Homeschooling was not part of our.
So it's just being flexible, so that you're there for your kids.
That we're there for our kids. We were really passionate about Christian education. We wanted them to be in Christian schools because that's something that had worked for us, and we wanted to be able to pass that down to them. So our goal was they'd be always in a Christian school, in a school environment. We never planned on homeschooling.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you guys get married. And first kid.
Yeah.
How long? How was that journey? Yeah.
So once we got married, I'm in this situation where, now initially before we got married, I think going for my further education, what was pushing me there was the ability to care for my son. I never really thought beyond like what my passion was. And so when we got married and we were talking about flexibility and options and all of that, my husband encouraged me to explore what I was actually passionate about. And so this led me down the path again to psychology, which was something that I'd always been interested in. And that's how I ended up going for my master's in psychology. And while I was doing my master's, we got pregnant with our first son. And I had my son during my graduate studies, my second son. And that was, transitioning into, again, motherhood was easier. I had someone else to do it with. But again, I found myself struggling with postpartum depression. Our son had a lot of needs as an infant. He's on the autism spectrum disorder. He has an autism spectrum disorder. He's on the spectrum. And so as an infant, he had really high needs. And I think that combined with just postpartum depression, I found myself going back to just that depressed mood and feeling, finding myself going down and becoming clinically depressed. And it's a whole set of feelings. I think when I first had my son going through postpartum depression was different, because I think I attributed it to being a single mom and everything else that was going around me. And so being married and finding myself there, it's like, wait, everything is good. I have my husband, I have a support system, but I'm struggling. I'm struggling to get out of bed. I'm struggling to find joy. I have this child and I should be joyful, but I'm still struggling. I'm struggling to find joy. I'm struggling in these daily tasks. And again, just continued to just struggle. And I was able to, I think having gone through it, I did quickly identify it as postpartum depression. And I think I'd learned to advocate myself well enough that I was able to see a doctor. And this time it was bad enough that it was actually showing up physically. I was having panic attacks. I was waking up, having anxiety attacks. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. My heart was racing. My blood pressure was acting up. And so it was presenting migraines, just physical symptoms. And so this time I did have to consider medication. Before, it had been manageable enough without medications, but this time I had to consider medications. And I did go on a medication that helped, which again is a whole other thing. I think as a mother, as a Christian, there's a struggle of, is this a faith thing? Am I, going on meds? There's such stigma with that and fear of what that can do, especially when you want to have other children. But I did enough research to know that this was something that I needed to put my safety first to be able to be present for my family. And then the other things were going to come after that. So I was on medication for a short period. And then with therapy again, I was able to find my own grounding. And this is something that continually, every pregnancy that I had, I struggled with postpartum depression. But more so with my son on the spectrum, because as he got older, we tried to take him to school. And this kind of ties into how we started homeschooling. And, being that we were set on taking them to private school, Christian school, we enrolled him in a Christian private school. And he just was having a really hard time. He wasn't functioning. The structure was very rigid. I would pick him up from school. This was preschool at this point. I would pick him up from school and my child would just have a meltdown all the way home. He would just cry for hours and hours and hours, and there was no settling him. At this point, he didn't have a diagnosis. I knew that there was something going on with him, but getting a diagnosis for him, the journey to get him even diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum wasn't an easy one. And so the advocacy piece for him, I found myself feeling drained because, and at this point I had my third child too. So I had an infant. I had my son who's on the spectrum really struggling. I had my other son who's in 5th grade at this point. And I just juggling between advocating for him to get the help and the resources he needed, being a new mother again in the midst of postpartum depression for the 3rd time, and working. At this point, I was working in crisis services in mental health, which is a lot of just energy and time and mental health that you have to pour into other people. Juggling all of that, and our oldest was also struggling at school with a lot of racial stuff at this point, he was in middle school, just a Black middle school boy. So there was a lot of things that were going on. We were dealing with that. We were dealing with my son on the spectrum. I had a new baby, potentially in postpartum depression again, working. And I found I slowly started finding myself just overwhelmed, and it started to seep into our marriage, and I started to get resentful, and almost like I feel like we started to do this thing where, well, you were working, I was working, so now you take the kids, you do this, almost tit for tat in our marriage. And it was overwhelming. It was extremely overwhelming. I constantly felt like I needed to pour into my child with special needs. I needed to pour into my child that was struggling, navigating social stuff at school. I needed to pour into my infant, and I needed to pour into my marriage.
Wait.
And work.
You are unloading. But Nancy,
Yeah.
talk to a parent who is parenting a special needs kid.
A special needs kid.
Yes.
Man.
And talk a little bit about, how can you diagnose or identify as a mother some of those things that for you, for someone that you saw.
I want to say, as a mother, as a parent, I think more so as a mother, you know when your child is struggling, when your child has needs. I think oftentimes you want to hear that they are not struggling. You want to maybe even pretend that they're not. There were many times that when my son was born, when I brought my son home, I told my husband, I said, I think he's on the spectrum. And this was on the way home from the hospital. I said, he's not giving eye contact. There's something off with our son. There was something off. And I knew it, but everybody around me said the opposite. Everybody around me was telling me that he's normal, he's okay, and I think people say that sometimes as something to comfort you. But I think as a parent, I would say trust your gut. I think no one knows their children or their needs better than a parent, better than a mother. You've given birth to that child. You know them better than anybody. I think if there's any doubt, any concerns, seek help. There's a lot of resources. Seeking help sounds simple, but it can get complicated. I think seek help, but don't give up. If you still know and feel it in your gut that there's something going on, that your child needs are different, just don't stop until you've advocated for them, until they've got the help and the resources that they need. And so I think for me, part of why we homeschool, again, I was in this space where I was like, I can't continue to give bits and pieces to these different areas of my life. I can't continue to take from my marriage to give to the kids, to take from one kid to give another, to take from work to give to my family. Because I also felt a sense of guilt as a mental health provider to my clients. Oftentimes, my heart and my mind were at home with my children who were struggling. And so there was a sense of conflict for me trying to juggle, being fully present with my clients when I needed to pour somewhere else into my family. And so I got to a point where we both acknowledged, my husband and I, we were like, it's just not working. It isn't working. The kids are struggling. We can clearly see that they're struggling. My son was a straight A student. But then there's things that started happening at school. There was a lot of, not with the other students, but just teachers saying things to him, and the way that the responses that he was getting and the messages that he was getting. And we started to see him almost like get, I don't know, he would make statements that, I'm not a good student, or I'm not a good kid. I'm about, start to internalize these things, messages that he was hearing. And we knew that wasn't him. And we didn't want him to go down this pathway with internalizing these things. And again, our second son, school just wasn't working for him. The structure wasn't working for him. Public school was another option that we explored, but because getting him diagnosed, he's what is considered twice exceptional. So he's very gifted, but he has deficiencies too and special needs. So those kids fall right in the middle, the cutoff, and oftentimes they're missed. They're missed. They need services, they need extra help, but they're missed because they present as neurotypical kids.
Yeah.
But then yet they can't function in a neurotypical environment. And so we found ourselves in this space where it's like we can't take him to public school because he can have the resources. He doesn't have the diagnosis. We can keep him in private school because it's too rigid for him. His learning style was very different. Again, he's very smart in things that he's passionate about. But then there's areas, social situations where he doesn't have good boundaries. And so someone has to be there to watch him to make sure that he's safe around strangers and all these things. And so all this pretty much led to that decision, us sitting down and looking at our options, looking at, okay, what options are there? And I think oftentimes we assume that there's just one option. We assume that all kids have to go through a certain system of education and all of that. But yeah, so that's kind of what led us to have that open discussion of what is important to us at this point and this stage in our life. Is it to pursue our careers, to pursue this type of education, or to, just circle back and try to see what else is out there?
Man, I still want you to talk to a parent that's parenting special needs child, and how just whatever words, if it's encouragement or what would you tell them if they're feeling that they have to pour into their family, pour into this kid, to this child, pour into work? What would you tell someone like that? What would you encourage them?
I would first say, honestly, as cliche as it sounds, I would say take care of yourself first, because you can't pour from an empty place. Find what you need. What are the resources you need to first be grounded yourself? Do you need, for me, it's recognizing when I'm overwhelmed and saying, I need someone else to take this piece. I need to find a therapist for this piece. I need to ask my husband to help with this piece. I need my mom to help with this piece. I need to go for a run. I need to disconnect and just spend time in the Word or spend time by myself. And I think once you have that piece taken care of, then everything else becomes a little bit clearer. Then it's easier to find the help, the resources that child needs. It's easier to show up the way that child needs for you to show up. Because children with special needs, when you show up the way that they need for you to show up, when they have the resources that they need, they
thrive.
They thrive. Our son, honestly, he's been such a blessing to us. He's the most kind-hearted, most sensitive, most people-loving child that we have of all of our children, and the others are amazing too. But yeah, so I would say first find what you need to be able to get grounded enough to be able to provide what others need. Because I think sometimes as mothers, as parents with special needs kids, we can pour, and then we burn out. And then it's not good for anybody at that point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna start wrapping up here for this session, because we gotta talk about how does homeschooling work. Kenan might take a tip or two out of that. But two things I want to say as we come back to closing remarks on us. Number one is I want to pause here, viewers, listeners, and just first of all, Just want to show some love to these two amazing people here, even you, Kenan, very amazing people.
Let me concentrate.
And the reason I say that is that, it's just a joy to sit in a room with two black therapists, people who actually have recognized the need, have a passion for it, actually pursue it. Because as I listen to you, Nancy, some of that experience actually helps you navigate this journey, And so one of the things I like to say, if there's anyone out there listening, anyone who needs help, hey, here's some two beautiful and handsome resources right in front of you guys. Just, I wouldn't say inbox. Anyways, we will find ways where we can put, if you want to reach out to get resources or talk to someone, these will be amazing people to talk. If you're a value-based Christian, hey, they're also, actually in that realm.
If you don't have insurance,
if you don't
work on that.
We'll work on that and stuff like that. It's just amazing. I'm just blown away by hearing that. Second thing I just want to honor here and acknowledge is that it sounds easy, Nancy, as you say all those things.
Yeah.
But in that phase, it must have been very overwhelming.
Very difficult.
Very overwhelming. Because as I listen, you're in school, you're working, because the first time you're in school, you're working, child special needs, another child, postpartum depression, trying to navigate all that, a marriage. But also one thing beautiful that I've heard from you is recognizing that your marriage needs your attention. Most of the times we talk about, divorce rate is 50%. Sometimes it's not because the other person is bad or they changed. It's some of these realities in life when we don't address them, they become mountains. So just listening to you, just wanted to echo, to celebrate that. And just say, man, this is amazing. So I want us to start wrapping up, and I'm going to start with Kenan. Kenan, what are you hearing? What are your final thoughts? And then I'll come to you, Nancy. Like, what are you? Just talk to someone, talk to us as we wrap up, and then we'll close and prepare for the next session.
I think what I've had the most is at this point in her life and in everybody's life is there's these roles and hats that mothers wear, and just juggling between those roles and shifting from one to the other. And there's those things that matter in your life, like parenting, raising your kids, providing for them, being there for your husband, both physically and emotionally and all that. I think it can be, and it is overwhelming. So carving that lifestyle in a way that, lessens that burden, and tapping into your support systems, tapping into your faith, tapping into your friends, those that, you can trust. I think that makes it a little bit easier to juggle those roles, because as a mother of 4 kids, one with special needs, those roles, and so I think knowing what those roles look like and just juggling that and tapping into your faith, your support system, I think that's what I think I'm going to borrow from you into my perspective as well. So, and I'm encouraged. I'm very inspired by you and your story, and I think it's a testament to what family is, and what we can achieve being in a nucleus family. And just there's challenges. Your marriage is not is not perfect. No. Mine isn't either, and Ezra's as well isn't either. But then just finding the perfection in that imperfectness, and finding what brings life to that imperfection. I think that's what matters most. So
what would you sum up this session for you, Nancy?
Sum up. We've talked about bits and pieces of different seasons of my life as a teen, as a young mother, as I want to call it maturing mother. And bits and pieces of marriage and parenting. I guess for me, I really want to speak to that mother that's, again, juggling all these hats and different things and feeling overwhelmed. And I think oftentimes we can feel like that's our reality. We don't have many choices. We don't have many options, and it can appear to be that way. But I think I want to say from my experience that there are options. There are different. There's different ways we can do things. There's different ways we can think through things. There's different ways we can access support, and there's always a way. Through the mental health piece, through the parenting piece, through the juggling piece. There's always a way of just finding the help that we need, or we need the support that we need to be able to thrive, even when it feels like that's the last thing we're going to be able to do. That's what I would say.
Man, beautiful, 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 man. You know, what I've learned from this is a beautiful story of love story, man. I think we need to make a Netflix movie out of that. You know, salsa dance kind of thing, stuff like that. Pastor Moku up there. It's a beautiful one, beautiful story. And just want to encourage someone out there that your story is not done yet. Hang in there, your day, everything works perfectly and timely for every single person, as God and fate or whatever you believe in will have it. I also wanted, one thing I had from this podcast is also the cautiousness of a single mother into getting into a relationship, right? It's not, just thinking about yourself. You're thinking of another human being, and you're putting center, putting the human being in center of the entire action. I've also had, the journey of juggling multiple things, and how that affects you in your life, and how you make decisions in those moments, and how you navigate that. One thing I like to wind up and saying is that, and how you came to the decision of homeschooling. But I want to pause here again and shout someone else. I want to shout out your husband.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I want to shout out because, there are many brothers who will have dipped long time ago, right? There are many people who will sat down and say, you know what, this is not for me. But just taking it in with you and you guys finding a way to navigate this situation and working together is just a beautiful story of hope and encouragement. And so if you're a single mother out there, your journey is not done. You're writing your story, you have a beautiful child or beautiful children. Let them be your hope, fight for them, live for them, and they feed from their energy too. There's a father out there who's struggling in their journey, or a husband out there. Hey, hang in there. Don't wait to be killed or anything like that. Domestic violence is real, vice versa. But, just being able to identify that. And there are people like Pastor Moko out there, we need more people to look out for others out there and stuff like that. But above all, I want to say this, I want to celebrate women. Really want to celebrate the superpower of a woman. It is just the statement that I'm taking from this podcast is, you're driving home from hospital and you tell your husband, our child might be in the spectrum end. The instinct of a mother is just so deep and so powerful, so profound, and that is who women are, and that's what women bring to this world, and that's what shapes us to be who we are. And if you need resources again, Single Mother Jeremiah program is a good resource for you. Mental health, please seek and get that help. And above all, if you believe in God and have faith, hang on in there. That has been our time for this episode. But guess what? Homeschooling is the next episode. I'm curious to learn. I was here with Ken and he barely survived the COVID season, staying home with kids. How does Nancy and the husband do it with 4 kids, and how does that journey go, and what can we learn? So tune in for the next episode. That has been our time here. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Amazing Truth Podcast. We hope you were blessed as you listened. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. God bless you, and see you on the next one.